The living room was immersed in a soft, comforting light as the afternoon bid farewell, and the space filled with the warm hues of sunset. It was a perfect setting for a family gathering, but instead of joy, there was a slight tension in the air. I glanced over at the doll Lila, sitting in a corner of the room, and couldn't help but feel a shiver. The doll, with its long, disheveled hair and eyes that seemed to follow me, had a strange aura. Mark, my husband, seemed to sense it too, but in a different way. "Look at this doll," he began with a sarcastic smile, "it looks like it came straight out of a horror movie. What was Grandma thinking leaving us this?" Emily, our youngest daughter, giggled and shook her head, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "She's beautiful, Daddy. Look at how colorful she is." Jake, our older son, watched with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Beautiful? If you say so," Mark replied, laughing nervously while stepping back, "but I'd rather keep my distance from her." He had always had an aversion to things he couldn't understand, and the doll clearly fell into that category. Emily approached the doll, her delicate fingers brushing against the sequin dress. "She has a name. Lila. It's like she's alive." As I watched, a mix of nostalgia and concern washed over me. Lila had been my grandmother's doll, a relic from a bygone era. I never worried about it as a child, but now, with my own kids, I felt a weight. "Grandma always said Lila had a special meaning," I commented, trying to keep the conversation light. "Special meaning or not, that doll looks a little unsettling," Mark said, running a hand through his hair. "Let's put it away somewhere safe, okay?" "No, Daddy. Let us play with her," Emily exclaimed, pulling Jake closer. "I don't know, kids. It might just be a doll, but she seems different," I said, hesitating. But the excitement in Emily's eyes and Jake's curiosity was infectious. "Let's just leave her here for a while," I suggested with a smile. "But if you start having nightmares, she goes to the attic, deal?" "Deal," the kids shouted in unison, while Mark shook his head, smiling but clearly still uncomfortable. After dinner, the house fell silent. The kids were already in bed, and Mark and I settled onto the couch, trying to relax after a long day. The crackling fireplace filled the room with a comforting warmth, but I couldn't shake the thought of the doll. The feeling that there was something more to Lila troubled me, but I chose to ignore it and focus on my conversation with Mark. "Do you think it was a good idea to leave the doll here?" I asked, trying to mask my unease. "Oh, sweetheart, you know how kids are. They'll forget about it in a few days." "It's just a doll," he replied, but his tone didn't convince me. As time passed, our conversation flowed to other topics, but the image of Lila continued to dance in my mind. When I finally went to bed, the unease lingered. I tried to ignore it, but as I closed my eyes, I couldn't help but let thoughts of the doll take over. I awoke in the middle of the night to soft laughter coming from the kids' room. Curiosity led me to get out of bed and cautiously walk down the hallway toward their room. The door was ajar, and the laughter grew louder now. I hesitated, but worry pushed me forward. When I pushed the door open, my breath caught for a moment. Jake and Emily were sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys, but what truly caught my attention was the doll Lila, now in a different corner of the room, as if it had moved on its own. "Hi, Lila," Emily said with a radiant smile. "Do you want to play with us?" "Yeah, Lila, you're so cool," Jake added, his voice low and whispery, as if sharing a secret. I approached, trying to understand the situation. "What are you two doing awake?" I asked, attempting to hide my panic. Lila was telling stories, Emily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "She said we can play forever." "Play forever?" I questioned, a chill running down my spine. "What else did she say?" Jake, looking at me with a serious expression, replied, "She said we need to be her friends, or else, she'll be sad." "But she's just a doll," I said, my voice wavering. You know dolls don't talk, right? They ignored me, turning their attention back to the doll, which somehow seemed more menacing than before. Lila's fixed gaze on me sent a wave of discomfort that I couldn't ignore. Time to go to sleep now, I said, trying to remain calm. But Lila told us we can play a little longer. Emily insisted, her voice sweet and innocent, but there was something in her gaze that made me uneasy. No, it's bedtime, I said, more firmly. Lila can stay here, but you both need to sleep. Reluctantly, Jake and Emily agreed, and I helped them settle back under their blankets. As I turned to leave, I felt a strange presence behind me. I looked back, and the doll Lila was now in a different position, almost as if she was watching me. The unease I felt transformed into palpable discomfort. "Good night, Lila," I murmured, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation, but the doll seemed to hold a dark secret in its silence. I closed the door gently and returned to my room, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave me. What were the kids really doing with Lila? And what exactly did the doll want from them? Questions danced in my mind, but I tried to convince myself it was just their imagination. After all, they were just kids, and Lila was just a doll. But even as I attempted to relax again, the image of Lila and Emily's words echoed in my mind. Play forever. What did that mean? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that the doll was much more involved than it seemed? The next day began normally, but there was a strangeness in the air that I couldn't ignore. The house, usually warm and inviting, felt draped in a shroud of coldness. As I moved around the kitchen, preparing breakfast, I felt as if someone were watching me. A shiver ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. Daily life had to continue, even with Lila's presence looming over us like a shadow. "Good morning, Sarah." Mark entered the kitchen, his gaze fixing on me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's just a strange day," I replied, trying to smile. "I think I'm just tired." He stepped closer and kissed me on the cheek. "Let's focus on what matters. We have to take care of our little ones." The kids were lively as always. Jake and Emily were in the living room, surrounded by scattered toys. Lila was on a shelf, an observant presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that the doll was more than just an inanimate object. It was as if she was aware of everything around us. "Hi, Mommy!" Emily shouted, waving at me. "Have you seen Lila?" "I left her here, but she's not in the same spot." "She must have moved on her own," Jake said with a mischievous grin. "She's magical." "Don't be silly, Jake," I laughed, though a pang of worry hit me. Dolls don't move by themselves. Yet as soon as the words left my mouth, a strange sensation washed over me. Part of me wanted to believe it was all just a child's game, but another part felt anxious and uneasy. The day went on, but strange events began to pile up. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard soft laughter coming from the kids' room. The sound was gentle, almost like a whisper, but it carried an undertone that made me uneasy. I decided to go check on them. The door to their room was ajar, and the soft glow of the lamp illuminated the scene. "Hi, Lila. You're the best doll in the world." ###, Emily said, her eyes sparkling, as Jake nodded in agreement. "She told me we can play forever," Jake added, a smile that seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression on his face. The way they talked about Lila made me feel completely uneasy. "Hey, kids," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "What are you doing?" The children turned to me but didn't seem surprised. "We're just talking to Lila, Mommy," Emily replied, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "She moved here," Jake said, pointing to the doll that was in a different corner of the room than where I had left her. "She likes to be near us. You shouldn't play with her so much at night." "It's time for bed," I tried to sound authoritative, but the truth was I felt more scared than disciplinary. "But she's our friend," Emily protested, crossing her arms. "We're not going to separate from her." She's just a doll, I said, but the certainty in my voice was wavering. Come on, it's bedtime. The kids lay down, but the feeling of discomfort continued to linger. The doll Lila seemed more alive than ever, and my mind was filled with questions. I tried to push it all aside, but when I turned off the light and closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next morning, I was determined to ignore any negative thoughts. Breakfast was served, and the mood was light. Mark was telling a funny story about work, and the kids were laughing, but inside, I still felt restless. Let's take a look at Lila, kids, Mark suggested. Maybe she can tell us a story too. The children rushed to the living room, and I followed, hesitant. As soon as I walked in, I noticed Lila was in a new spot again, now sitting in a chair, with a look that seemed to follow me. A chill ran down my spine. Did you move Lila again? I asked, trying to maintain my calm. No, Mommy. Jake replied, his eyes sparkling with excitement. She moved by herself. Don't be silly. I said, a bit louder than I intended. She can't move on her own. But she's magical. Emily insisted, her voice high and full of joy. She wants to play with us. She's just a doll, kids. Let's stop this, I said, trying to put an end to the conversation. But deep down, my worry was growing. Something was changing in the dynamics of our home, and I felt powerless to stop it. In the following days, strange incidents began to pile up. Objects moved without explanation. A cup I had left on the table was now on the shelf. The air in the house felt colder, especially when Lila was nearby. Mark tried to stay calm, but I could see the tension on his face when he looked at the doll. Are you okay, love? I asked him while we were alone in the kitchen. Yeah, sure, he replied, but the hesitation in his voice was evident. It's just, these strange things. I don't know what to think. I don't either. Emily told me that Lila said she wants to play forever, I confessed, feeling a knot form in my throat. It's just their imagination. We shouldn't pay attention to it, Mark said, shaking his head. They're just kids, Sarah. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. I was on high alert, watching every movement. When night fell, the house felt quieter, but there was a palpable tension in the air. The kids' laughter had faded, and a soft whisper echoed through the house. Hearing that whisper made my heart race. Mark, did you hear that? I asked, my voice trembling. I heard it, but it must just be the wind, he replied, but the way his eyes narrowed betrayed his own uncertainty. I decided I needed to check, and with a knot in my stomach, I went to the living room. As I approached, I saw Lila in a different position on the shelf, as if she were watching me. Fear took over, and I almost screamed, but I managed to hold it in. Hi, Lila, I murmured, trying to calm my racing heart. You should stay where you were. But the doll only seemed to smile wider, and a feeling that something was about to happen enveloped me. I looked around, but the house was silent, except for my pounding heart. When I returned to the bedroom, the kids were sleeping, but the buzz of negative emotions seemed to dance around us. I knew we had to confront this, but how? What did that doll really want from us? The tension was intense, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep my composure. That night, when I finally lay down, I closed my eyes, wishing this was all just a nightmare. But the truth was that the doll Lila was becoming more than just a toy, she was becoming a part of our lives, and I was scared of what that meant. The atmosphere in the house felt strange, laden with a weight I couldn't identify. Morning light filtered through the curtains, creating soft patterns on the floor of the kids' room. I felt restless, as if something was about to happen. The doll Lila, with her enigmatic smile and empty eyes, seemed to be always watching. I couldn't shake the image of her from my mind. That morning, I decided I needed to understand better what was happening. Jake and Emily were entertained with their toys, oblivious to the tension in the air. Mom, look what Lila taught me to do. Emily said, holding the doll with a sparkle in her eyes. My heart tightened a bit in my chest. What did she teach you, sweetheart? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She said we can have tea parties and play forever. Emily replied, her voice full of enthusiasm. I just smiled, but inside me, an echo of concern began to form. How could a doll have so much power over the kids? The idea seemed absurd, but something told me there was more to this story than met the eye. Once the kids went to school, I decided it was time to investigate the history of the doll. I entered my grandmother's office, a place that had always fascinated me. The smell of old paper and the soft light filtering through the window created an environment ripe for uncovering secrets. I started rummaging through the shelves, searching for any clue that could explain Lila's presence. After a while, I found a dusty journal, hidden among some books. The cover was worn, and when I opened it, the pages revealed my grandmother's delicate handwriting. I began to read, and with every word, a sense of unease grew. She wrote about a local cult, protection rituals involving the doll. Lila is a guardian, one passage said, but be careful, for she can also become a portal to forces we cannot comprehend. My heart raced. I needed to know more. I continued reading, absorbing every word. My grandmother mentioned that the doll had been created with the intention of protecting our family, but there was always a cost associated with that protection. The idea that Lila could be both a guardian and a threat left me confused. How could a doll be both? As I reflected on this, I was interrupted by Mark's voice, who had come home early. What are you doing here, Sarah? He asked, a hint of disdain in his tone. Still worried about that strange doll? Mark, you need to read this, I replied, holding out the journal. Lila isn't just a doll. She has a history, and it's a history that involves our family. He flipped through a few pages, but his expression was one of skepticism. This is just superstition, Sarah. We can't let this affect our lives. The kids are fine, aren't they? I knew he was just trying to keep calm, but the truth was I wasn't so sure. Mark, it's not just that. Jake and Emily have been acting strangely. Last night, I heard them whispering to Lila. That's not normal. He rolled his eyes. Kids have imaginations, Sarah. That doesn't mean the doll is a problem. I fell silent, frustrated. The truth is that I felt I was losing my connection with him and, more importantly, with our children. As we talked, I didn't notice the day turning into night and the shadows beginning to stretch across the house. That night, while I tried to relax, nightmares began to haunt Mark. I heard him tossing in bed, mumbling incoherent words. Lila, no. Don't do that. He was in a state of agitation, and I didn't know how to help him. Mark, wake up. It's okay, love, I said, gently touching his arm. He opened his eyes, confused. What happened? You had a nightmare. Do you want to talk about it? I asked, trying to be encouraging. It was Lila. She was laughing at me, whispering things I couldn't understand. I don't know if I'm losing my mind, Sarah, he replied, his voice trembling. No, you're not. She's just a doll, Mark. We need to find out more about her, I said, trying to bolster his confidence. But deep down, I was also scared. The next day, the tension in the house only increased. Jake and Emily were drifting away from us, and their conversation seemed to be increasingly whispered. I decided I needed to confront them. What are you doing with Lila? I asked, trying to remain calm. She's our friend, Mom. Jake replied, a spark in his eyes. She said we can do amazing things. Amazing things? Like what? I asked, with concern growing inside me. Emily chimed in, she taught us to fly and have magical parties. I looked at them, trying to understand. That's not real, Lila is just a doll. You don't understand, Jake said, his tone defiant. She knows things. She's special. Anger began to boil inside me, but I knew I couldn't lose my temper. You need to stop this. Lila isn't what you think. The children exchanged glances, and a heavy silence fell. It was as if Lila's presence was pressing down on all of us, separating us. What was wrong? I needed to find out, and fast. Later, while Mark tried to concentrate on his work, I couldn't help but notice the distant look on his face. Are you still thinking about Lila? I asked. I can't help it, Sarah. It's like she's watching us all the time. I can't shake this feeling, he replied, his voice laden with tension. Night fell, and the darkness seemed to engulf our home. The kids were asleep, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything I had discovered. I needed to act. So, I decided that the next morning, I would go back to my grandmother's journal and look for more information. Once in the living room, I grabbed the journal again and started searching for passages that could give me an idea of what was happening. With every word I read, the feeling that something was very wrong intensified. My grandmother mentioned that the doll should be kept in a safe place and that disrespecting her presence could unleash the forces she protected. My stomach churned at the thought of that. It was then that I found a passage that left me paralyzed. Lila was created as a guardian but can feed on negative emotions. If not controlled, she could become a destructive force. What did that mean for us? The fights, the tensions, could all of that have fed the doll's influence? I needed to talk to Mark again, but when I went to find him, he was sitting on the couch, with a dark expression. Mark, you need to see this. I said, showing him the journal. I don't want to think about this anymore, Sarah. It's just an old story, he retorted, frustration evident in his voice. It's not just a story. It's our life, and we need to understand what's happening to our kids. He looked at me, and for a moment, the silence between us seemed to scream. If you really believe Lila is causing this, then we need to do something. But what? The conversation hung in the air, and the feeling that Lila was among us, watching, never left me. And in that moment, I knew the fight was just beginning. That night, the house was shrouded in a heavy, almost suffocating silence. The lights in the living room flickered intermittently, as if they were struggling against an impending blackout. I sat at the kitchen table, trying to concentrate on a book I had read several times. However, my mind was far from the story printed on the pages. The image of Lila, the doll left by my grandmother, was stamped in my memory like a shadow that refused to fade. Mark entered the kitchen, and upon seeing me, made a disdainful expression. You're still on that book. With everything going on, you should be more worried about the doll than fiction, he said, his tone heavy with irony. I know, but I just can't understand what's happening with the kids. They're so different, I replied, unable to hide the concern in my voice. They're just kids, Sarah. They have vivid imaginations. We can't let the idea of a strange doll overshadow our home, he shot back, but he couldn't hide the restlessness that accompanied him. Whatever was happening with Lila was starting to affect us all. That morning, while I tried to organize some things in the attic, I found an old diary of my grandmother's, covered in dust and cobwebs. My heart raced as I realized it might contain information that could explain the strange connection between the children and the doll. The smell of aged paper brought me back to childhood memories when my grandmother told stories about protection and family traditions. With the diary in hand, I went downstairs to the living room, where Mark was watching TV. Mark, you need to see this, I called, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. He looked at me with disinterest, but when I opened the notebook and began to read aloud, his expression changed. The local cult, protection rituals, I read, as his eyebrows knitted together. This is just superstition, Sarah. We can't get carried away by this, he said, but his voice had a hesitation that didn't go unnoticed by me. But what if there's something more? What if the doll isn't just a doll? I feel like she's changing the kids, I argued, my heart racing. Suddenly, a scream coming from the children's room interrupted our conversation. We rushed to the door, and when we opened it, we found Jake and Emily standing frozen, staring fixedly at Lila, who seemed to be in a different position than we had left her. The look on the children's faces was one of terror and fascination at the same time. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep calm, but the tension in my voice was undeniable. She talked to us, Mom. Lila said we need to play forever, Emily said, her voice trembling. Mark crossed his arms. See? It's just their imagination. Let's leave them alone, he said, but I already felt that things were beyond our control. That night, as I tried to sleep, restlessness overtook me. The children's laughter echoed in my mind, mixed with the whisper of the journal. I knew I needed to investigate further, but what would I find? I got out of bed and went down to the living room, determined to find answers. As I approached the bookshelf, a chill ran down my spine. Lila was there, standing, looking at me with an enigmatic smile. You shouldn't have come here, she seemed to whisper, even though there was no sound. I stepped closer, and a wave of cold washed over the room. Mark. I called, but he was deeply asleep. The silence of the house was even more oppressive. What did Lila want from me? What was happening to the children? The next day, the tension in the house was palpable. Mark tried to act normally, but his expression was distant. We made an effort to maintain our routine, but every little incident seemed to pile more weight on our hearts. Objects changed places, the lights flickered more than usual, and the air felt colder when Lila was near. I'm not crazy, am I? I asked myself, looking at Mark. ####. He was on the couch, his eyes glued to the television, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Sarah, stop it. Let's ignore it. This phase will pass, he said, but I could see the worry in his eyes. What he didn't know was that I couldn't just ignore it. Lila's presence was intensifying, and with it, Jake and Emily's strange behaviors were escalating. Later, while trying to talk to the kids, I discovered they were becoming more and more involved with the doll. She's our friend, Mom. You can't separate us from her. Jake shouted, his eyes wide in a way that knotted my stomach. She's doing something to you, isn't she? You shouldn't be near her, I pleaded, but they were so out of control, so determined to defend Lila, that they couldn't see what was happening. You don't understand. Lila is special. Emily said, her voice filled with emotion. I felt a wave of despair. What was happening to my children? What had Lila done to them? That night, as everyone tried to sleep, I decided to investigate further. My grandmother's diary was becoming an obsession for me. What else could be hidden in its yellowed pages? Hearing whispers coming from their room, curiosity led me to open the diary again. The words I read left me in shock. There were descriptions of a local cult that worshipped the doll as a goddess of protection, but the references to rituals and the need to keep the doll in their possession to prevent the release of an evil spirit were alarming. I wondered if this was what was happening. Lila was not just a doll, she was a vessel of a power that could be dangerous. Mark. I called, my voice trembling. He appeared in the doorway, a look of concern on his face. You need to see this, I said, handing him the diary. This is just an old story, Sarah. We can't let ourselves be carried away by superstitions, he insisted, but I could see fear beginning to take hold of him as well. What if it's true? What if we're putting our lives and the children's lives at risk? I asked desperately. Mark hesitated, his expression slowly changing as he read the passages. Maybe we should do something about it, he murmured, doubt now visible in his gaze. That night, as the house sank into an unsettling silence, I knew something needed to be done. Lila was more than just a strange doll, there was an evil power that was dividing our family and leading us into an abyss of fears and insecurities. I tried to sleep, but Lila's presence seemed to be everywhere, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. An internal battle began to form within me. I wanted to protect my children and Mark, but how could I do that when the doll itself was becoming a part of their lives? Hours passed, but sleep didn't come. What was really happening to our family? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the kids talking to Lila, laughing and whispering secrets that couldn't be heard. And what troubled me most was that I couldn't reach my children. It was as if an invisible barrier had been erected between us and the doll, and with each passing day, that barrier grew taller. The next morning, as the sun rose over the house, I decided I needed help. The first thing I did was call a friend of my grandmother's, someone I had always respected and who had deep knowledge of family traditions. As soon as she answered, I didn't hesitate to explain the situation. "Sarah, you need to be cautious with the doll. Lila is not just a toy. She can be a powerful force, and if the children are connected to her, we need to find out how to reverse this before it's too late. Meet me at the park this afternoon," she said, her voice laden with urgency. With a new sense of determination, I went to the park, where my grandmother's friend was waiting for me. As soon as we met, she looked at me seriously. "I know Lila's story. She is connected to your family in ways you can't imagine. We need to perform a ritual to protect the children and the house, but you must be prepared for the consequences." The tension in the house was already palpable, like a storm about to break. I was in the kitchen, trying to prepare a snack for the kids, but my mind wouldn't settle. The image of the doll Lila, with her empty gaze and enigmatic smile, wouldn't leave my head. When Jake and Emily started acting strangely, I knew something was very wrong. What was once just a doll had now become a symbol of unease and fear. While I sliced the apples, I remembered the conversation I had with Mark the night before. He had tried to brush it off, insisting that it was just childish imagination. "They're just kids, Sarah. They like to make up stories. It's normal," he had said, but in his eyes, I could see a flicker of doubt. He was trying to be strong, but I could feel the fragility of his spirit. "Why don't you go talk to them?" I suggested. "Maybe if you talk to them, they'll realize that Lila isn't a real friend." Mark just shook his head, as if trying to convince himself the situation wasn't that serious. Determined to understand what was happening, I grabbed my phone and started searching for information about the doll. I looked up local folklore and mystery forums. My heart raced when I found a report about a similar doll, mentioning a cult that used it as part of their rituals. The description was disturbing. The doll was a form of protection but also a prison for an evil spirit. The words echoed in my mind like an alarm bell. "Sarah, are you okay?" Mark's voice pulled me from my trance. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, looking worried. "You look pale." I found some things about Lila," I replied hesitantly. "I think we need to talk about it." He frowned, skeptical. "About what?" "We can't keep feeding this. It's just a doll. The kids are just imagining things." "But what if it's not just that? Mark, what if there's something more? We need to protect the kids." The urgency in my voice brought him closer, his expression softening. "Okay. What did you find?" He sat down at the table, and I realized the conversation was taking a more serious turn. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I found a report about a local cult that used dolls like Lila in rituals. They believed these dolls could protect the family but also imprison spirits," I said, feeling the weight of the words. "What if Lila is one of those dolls? What if she's influencing Jake and Emily in ways we can't even imagine?" Mark leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "That's disturbing, to say the least. But you know these stories can be exaggerated, right?" "Yes, but we can't ignore the signs. Jake is acting strangely, and Emily seems more obsessed every day. We need to do something about it. Like what? He asked, his voice low. What do you suggest? I don't know yet. But we can talk to the kids, try to understand how they feel about the doll, I said, determined. If Lila is a friend to them, maybe we can discover what's really happening. As we talked, I heard laughter coming from the living room. The sound was loud and clear, almost as if the kids were having a blast. I exchanged a glance with Mark, and a chill ran down my spine. It was late at night, and the kids should be in bed, not having fun. Let's see what they're doing, Mark suggested, getting up. I followed him, my heart racing, fearing what we might find. When we arrived in the living room, the scene before us left me speechless. Jake and Emily were sitting on the floor, the doll Lila between them, laughing and whispering to each other. The doll was in a position I hadn't left her in, as if she had moved on her own. Hey, kids! What are you doing? Mark asked, trying to sound casual, but his voice betrayed a hint of tension. #####. The children looked at us with expressions of pure joy. We're playing with Lila, Daddy. Emily exclaimed, holding the doll lovingly. She said we can play forever. My heart sank. Looking at the doll, a sense of unease washed over me. Play forever? I asked, trying to keep calm. What else did she say? Jake, with a dreamy look, replied, she said we're a family and we should always stick together. Mark glanced at me, and I could see the worry in his eyes. Isn't that amazing? He said, but his voice was hesitant. Yeah, amazing, I said, trying to be positive, but the feeling that something was very wrong was undeniable. But what are you guys doing exactly? Shouldn't you be getting ready for bed? No, Lila wants us to stay awake. Emily answered, her voice filled with excitement. She's our friend. I felt a chill in my stomach. She's a doll, kids. Friendship is a real thing between people, not objects. But Lila is special. Jake interjected, defending the doll fervently. She's our real friend. Mark and I exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between us. We needed to act, but how? The next morning, my unease hadn't lessened. I decided I needed more information. I remembered a friend of my grandmother's, Dona Helena, who always spoke about local traditions and our family history. She was a wise woman, and maybe she could help me understand the situation better. When I called her, Dona Helena's voice was warm, but there was an urgent tone. Sarah, dear. What can I do for you? Hi, Dona Helena. I'm having some difficulties with the kids and a doll that belonged to my grandmother. Could you help me understand more about it? She hesitated, and the silence seemed to stretch for a long time. You said doll. Which doll? Lila, I replied, and I could feel the air around us grow heavier. The kids are really attached to her, and I'm starting to worry. Please, can you tell me more about her story? Dona Helena sighed. Lila, oh, my dear. Lila is more than just a doll. She was created as a form of protection. You need to know that our family has a special connection to her. Special connection? What do you mean? I asked, anxiety growing. In ancient times, there was a cult that believed dolls could trap spirits and protect families. Lila was made for that purpose. But, like all protection, it can come at a cost. The spirit inside her feeds on negative emotions and conflicts. If you're not careful, it can break free. Her words echoed in my mind, and a chill ran down my spine. So, Lila isn't just a doll, she's a portal. Yes, Dona Helena confirmed. You and your family need to understand that true strength lies in coming together. If you let fear take over, the doll may use that against you. Face your fears, Sarah. Love is the key. I hung up, my heart racing. What could I do? I needed a plan, something that could protect my family and free them from this influence. When I returned home, the kids were playing in the living room, and I knew I had to act quickly. My conversation with Dona Helena had given me an idea. We needed a ritual, something that could free Lila from her malignant influence and protect our emotions. Mark, we need to do something right now, I said, finding him in the hallway. We need to perform a ritual to protect ourselves and free the kids from Lila. He looked at me, confusion written across his face. A ritual? Sarah, are you serious? Yes. We need to face this head-on. If Lila really feeds on negative emotions, we need to turn that into something positive. We can perform a ritual of unity and protection. He hesitated for a moment, but then slowly nodded. Okay, let's do this. But we need the kids to participate. If they don't understand what we're doing, it could make things worse. Right, let's call them, I said, determined. We gathered Jake and Emily in the living room, and I could see curiosity in their eyes. Kids, we need to talk about Lila, I began, trying to find the right words. The room was enveloped in a heavy atmosphere. The dim light from the candles flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, as if the house itself were holding its breath in anticipation. I looked at my children, Emily and Jake, who were huddled on the couch, wide-eyed and a mix of fear and curiosity on their faces. In the center of the room, the doll Lila sat in a position that felt increasingly threatening. Her porcelain gaze seemed to follow every movement I made, an unsettling presence in the once-safe family environment. Let's begin, said Sarah, her voice trembling but determined. She held the diary she had found, the yellowed pages revealing the dark history of the doll and the cult surrounding it. We need to free the house and the children from this influence. Do you really think this will work? I asked, trying to maintain a rational viewpoint despite the growing strangeness. What if this thing turns against us? What do we do if everything goes wrong? We have no choice, Mark. Look at them. Sarah pointed to our children, who were becoming increasingly absorbed by Lila's presence. We can't let this continue. They need us. I took a deep breath and nodded, recognizing the need to act. All right. What do we need to do? Sarah began to organize the items she had gathered, salt, dried herbs, and a small bowl of water. She looked at the doll, her eyes filled with determination. We need to create a circle of protection and invoke the forces that can help us. We must show Lila that she doesn't belong here. Jake, holding Emily's hand, looked at the doll with distrust. She's not bad, Mom. She just wants to play with us. No, son, I replied, trying to stay calm. She doesn't want to play. She wants something from you. We need to protect both of you. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and I could feel the negative energy intensifying. Sarah began to draw a circle with the salt on the floor, her hands trembling slightly. Stay inside the circle, kids. This will protect us. I don't want to do this, Emily said, tears shining in her eyes. Lila is my friend. She's not your friend, Emily, Sarah replied, almost in a whisper. She's not an ordinary doll. We need to do this so you and Jake can be free. The room felt colder with each passing second, as if Lila herself were absorbing the warmth around us. I looked at the doll, and her expression seemed to shift, as if she were enjoying our despair. The porcelain smile now appeared more sinister. Let's begin, said Sarah, her voice steady. She picked up the bowl of water and started to recite the words she had found in the diary, a mix of incantations and protective prayers. Benevolent spirits, we ask for your help. May light enter our hearts and darkness be banished. As she spoke, the atmosphere in the room began to change. The air grew thick, and a chill ran down my spine. I could hear a whisper in the background, a soft and malevolent voice that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. You can't stop me, it seemed to say. I am part of you now. Don't listen to that. I shouted, trying to push away the dark thoughts that began to invade my mind. Stay focused on what we're doing. As the ritual progressed, Lila's presence intensified. Her laughter grew louder, echoing through the walls of the room. You think you can banish me? I am stronger than you think. The voice seemed to reverberate in our ears. Keep going, Sarah. I implored, acting on instinct. Don't stop. Sarah looked at me, her expression revealing a mix of fear and determination. She continued to recite the words, but the intensity of Lila's presence was growing, as if she were concentrating all her energy into a single point. I am not a doll, I am the guardian of your fears. You will never get rid of me. Hashtag. The doll seemed to come to life, its eyes shining with a supernatural light. Emily and Jake were increasingly restless, their hands clenched as they watched the scene with wide eyes. Stay together. I shouted, but the atmosphere was becoming unbearable. The air grew heavier, and the feeling of panic began to take hold of me. We need to unite against this. I don't want to. Jake yelled, covering his ears. She's our friend. She's not. Jake, listen to your mother. Sarah was visibly distressed, but her voice still carried an authority that couldn't be contested. Lila is trying to tear us apart. She just wants to play. She just wants us to be happy. Emily cried, her innocence breaking my heart. No. That's not what she wants. I was starting to lose my patience, frustration and fear mixing into a storm within me. It's a trap. We need to fight against this. The room was filled with a palpable negative energy, and Lila's presence seemed to want to engulf us. I looked at the doll again, and its smile had now twisted into a macabre grin, as if feeding off our despair. You have no power here. I am part of your story, and I always will be. No. Sarah shouted, her voice piercing. We have the power. We are a family. What family? Lila retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. A family divided by fear and insecurity? That's not a family, it's a battlefield. A chill ran down my spine. Lila's words struck a sensitive chord in me. I looked at Sarah, Jake, and Emily, seeing the fear reflected in their faces. I knew the bond between us was fracturing with each passing second. We can't let this happen. I shouted, my voice echoing in the room. We need to fight. We need to unite. I don't want to lose Lila. Jake sobbed, his voice choked. You won't lose your family, Sarah replied, trying to soothe him. We will overcome this together. But Lila's presence was intensifying, and the room began to tremble. A bone-chilling cold enveloped our bodies, as if the house itself was writhing under the pressure of the doll's presence. I looked at Sarah, seeing her determination mingling with fear. It was a moment of decision. Come on, we need to finish this. Sarah said, her voice firm despite the situation. We are together, and that is stronger than anything she can do. The negative energy seemed to concentrate, and I knew the climax was approaching. Stay together, kids. Keep faith in your mother. I shouted, feeling a surge of courage swell within me. Sarah continued to recite the words of the ritual, and I could feel the house stirring, as if it were alive and responding to Lila's presence. Spirits of light, help us restore harmony. May the darkness recede and love prevail. As the words left her lips, a scream echoed in the room, a cry that seemed to come from Lila. You cannot stop me. I am part of you. The air was thick, and I could feel the battle intensifying. The room shook under the pressure, and a wave of negative energy seemed to wrap around us. I was engulfed by a deep fear, but at the same time, a renewed determination surged in my heart. We will not let this happen. I shouted, trying to convey strength to my children and to Sarah. We are a family, and the love we have is stronger than anything. The tension was palpable, and Sarah's words echoed in the room. Lila's power seemed to intensify, but we couldn't give up. The ritual was nearing its climax, and I knew the struggle was just beginning. The air in the room was heavy, charged with a dark energy that seemed to pulse around us. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating shapes that appeared to writhe in agony. I looked at my children's faces, Emily and Jake, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. They were so close to each other, as if proximity could protect them from Lila's threatening presence. Something was deeply wrong. The doll, which once seemed harmless, now stood out as a symbol of everything crumbling in our family. Mark, my husband, was in such a deep state of denial that I wondered if he could still grasp the gravity of the situation. He stood beside me, but his mind seemed far away, lost in a fog of skepticism that prevented him from seeing the truth. "Mark, we need to do this. We need to free ourselves from her," I said, my voice trembling with determination and fear. "She is affecting the kids, and you too. The way you've been acting. It's not you. Sarah, you're overreacting. It's just a doll." "The kids are just playing," he replied, but his voice had a hint of insecurity that didn't escape my notice. "Jake, Emily, come here," I called, trying to gather the children. They were in a trance, as if the doll had complete control over them. When Jake looked at me, his eyes were vacant, as if Lila had taken over his soul. "She's our friend, Mommy," Jake whispered, his voice low and distant. "She says we should stay together forever." A wave of despair washed over me. "No, my love. She's not your friend. She's using you. We need to get away from her." I stepped toward the doll, feeling my heart pound in my chest. It was as if Lila were watching me, her button eyes glinting with insidious malice. Mark grabbed my arm, his expression one of conflict. "Sarah, don't do this. You don't know what you're saying." "I know what I'm saying. Look at the kids. They are losing themselves." I nearly shouted, but a part of me knew that yelling wouldn't help. The atmosphere was tense, and Lila's presence seemed to intensify with each passing second. Then, something changed. Mark began to convulse, his eyes becoming opaque, as if a shadow had taken hold of him. "No, don't do this, Sarah," he murmured, his voice no longer his own. It was low and distorted, as if being manipulated by something evil. "Lila doesn't want you to hurt her." "Mark. Is that you talking? Look at me." I shook him, but he didn't respond. He was transforming into something I didn't recognize. A low laugh echoed in the room, a sound that seemed to emanate from the doll itself. The atmosphere was thick with a negative energy that made my stomach churn. "You cannot stop me," Lila whispered in a voice that was not that of a child. It was deep and threatening, reverberating off the walls like a distant echo. "I am the guardian. I keep the family united." "United? That's not unity. That's control." I shouted, feeling adrenaline surge through my body. Desperation fueled me. "Mark, you need to fight this. You're still here with me." He looked at me, but there was a void in his gaze, as if Lila had taken hold of his mind. "She's stronger than you think, Sarah," he said, and his words cut like a knife. I can't fight. You are stronger than this. Fight for us. Fight for Emily and Jake. They need you." I tried to reach him, but Lila's shadow grew, enveloping him in a palpable darkness. The children were in a trance, repeating words I knew Lila had taught them. "Lila is our friend, Lila is our friend," they chanted, their voices in unison, like a hypnotic mantra. I needed to break this connection, I needed to bring them back. "Emily. Jake. Look at me. I am your mother. I love you." I shouted, my voice resonating in the space, but it felt as if the doll had built a barrier between us. In a moment of desperation, I realized that the only way to reach my children was to confront Lila herself. I needed to face her, not with anger, but with love. A love that transcended the fear and darkness she had brought into our lives. Lila. I called, my voice now more resolute. You may try to divide us, but we are a family. The love we have for each other is stronger than you. You may try to control us, but I won't let you. Hashtag. The doll shuddered, and the laughter turned into an agonizing scream. You don't understand. I am the protection. I am the force that keeps the family united. You're not protection, you're a prison. I declared, feeling the weight of my words. You feed on fear and pain. I won't let you control us. Mark, you need to come back. You are stronger than this. Mark's gaze wavered for a moment, and I saw a flicker of lucidity in his eyes. Sarah. I don't want this. I don't want to lose you all, he murmured, the internal struggle evident on his face. Then fight. Fight for us. Fight for our family. I implored, reaching out my hand to him. I knew he was still in there, somewhere, battling Lila's influence. The atmosphere in the room began to shift, and I felt the negative energy around us transform into something lighter, more hopeful. I love you all, my children. Never forget that. I shouted, feeling the strength of the love we shared. Mark hesitated, and the expression on his face shifted from pain to determination. Sarah, I'm here. I won't leave you, he yelled, and Lila's shadow began to dissipate, but not without a fight. The doll contorted, its distorted features appearing more menacing than ever. You can't separate us. I am the bond. The strength. Lila screamed, but her voice was losing power. I knew we had to keep fighting, that the unity of our family was the key to our liberation. Come on, Mark. Fight for us. Fight for the love we have. I shouted, feeling a wave of hope wash over me. And in that moment, the light of our connection shone brightly, causing Lila to retreat. Deep down, I realized that the real battle was against the fear she had sown in our hearts. And with that, I knew we had to remain together, united by the strength of our love. I was in a state of despair when the idea hit me like lightning. It was as if a light had turned on inside me, revealing hidden truths about Lila and her connection to our family. As Emily and Jake's screams echoed in the background, I felt a growing pressure, as if the air were compressing around us. What I needed was clarity, something to help me understand why the doll had become such a powerful force in our lives. Lila isn't what she seems, I murmured to myself, trying to gather my thoughts. A part of me wanted to ignore the doll, to forget everything that had happened. But another part, the part that remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell, knew there was something deeper at play. With a racing mind, I began to recall the afternoons spent at her house when she spoke about the cult she worshipped. What I didn't realize back then was that those stories weren't just fairy tales, they were warnings. Sarah. Mark's voice interrupted my thoughts. He looked lost, his empty eyes reflecting the internal battle he was fighting. You need to stop this. This doll, it's not real. It's not just a doll, Mark. I exclaimed, feeling frustration boil over. It's part of our history, part of our family. Grandma left this for us. We need to understand what it really is. He shook his head, his expression troubled. This doesn't make sense, Sarah. This is madness. The kids they're changing. We need to get away from this. And what if the answer is right here? I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. Grandma's diary talks about protection, about rituals. Lila may be a form of protection that has turned into something evil. We need to discover the truth. You're obsessed. Mark replied, frustration clear in his tone. This obsession is destroying us. Hearing his words, I realized he was partly right. The tension was rising between us, but I couldn't give up. Something inside me knew I was close to uncovering the key to freeing our family. If Lila was indeed a form of protection that had become a prison, I needed to understand how that happened. Meanwhile, Jake and Emily were there, in a corner of the room, still conversing with the doll. The way their eyes sparkled as they spoke with Lila was disturbing. "Mom, you don't understand. Lila is our friend," Jake said, his voice filled with a loyalty that cut through my heart. "She wants us to play forever," Emily added, her innocent gaze contradicting the gravity of the situation. Those words echoed in my mind. "Play forever," I repeated aloud. What did that mean? Was it a veiled threat? I couldn't allow them to be consumed by this influence. "Emily, Jake, you don't understand. Lila isn't who you think she is. She's manipulating you," I said, trying to keep calm while panic swirled in my chest. The kids exchanged glances, confused. "No, Mom. Lila is good," Jake protested, and I saw the determination in his gaze. "She protects us." "Protects us from what?" The question slipped out of me before I could think. "What do you really think you're being protected from?" A wave of silence fell over the room. We could only hear Mark's heavy breathing and Lila's distant murmurs, as if she were whispering dark secrets. "What do you know about Lila, Mom?" Emily asked, her voice now a curious whisper. "I don't know everything, but Grandma mentioned something about rituals, and a cult that used the doll to protect the family." My heart raced. It was time to share what I had discovered. She wasn't just a doll, kids. Lila was a symbol of protection, but something went wrong. She became a portal for something darker. "That doesn't make sense," Mark exclaimed, his voice laden with skepticism. "She's just a doll. She can't have power over us." "But what if she does?" I asked, desperate. Grandma's diary talks about how love and family are the true sources of protection. If we don't fight against this now, we could lose each other forever. Mark hesitated, and in that moment, I felt the tide beginning to turn. "Do you really believe that could be true?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Yes," I replied, feeling hope begin to bloom within me. If we can understand what Lila truly represents, we can break this cycle of fear and manipulation. We need to face this together, as a family. Jake and Emily looked at each other, and for the first time, I saw a hint of doubt in their eyes. "What if Lila isn't evil?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "What if she just wants to be our friend?" "But true friendship isn't built on manipulation and fear," Mark responded, his expression beginning to soften. "We need to decide what we really want. Do you want to stay with Lila, or do you want to be free?" Mark's words echoed in the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and the pressure seemed to increase. "We want to be free," Jake shouted, and Emily nodded, though a trace of hesitation lingered in her gaze. "Then we need to discover the truth about our grandmother and Lila," I said, determination rising in my voice. "Let's find the diary and uncover what really happened. We need to do this before it's too late." Together, we began searching for Grandma's diary, rummaging through boxes and drawers while the tension in our home escalated. The sound of crinkled paper and the touch of ancient pages echoed in our hearts. Finally, we found the weathered diary, its pages worn by time. Carefully, I opened one of the pages, and my grandmother's words began to dance before my eyes. "Lila was created with love, but also with fear. A spirit that has lived in our family for generations. She will protect those who love her, but if misused, she can become a destructive force. This is what's happening," I said, my voice filled with emotion. "Lila was made to protect, but now she feeds on our fears and insecurities." Mark looked at me, understanding beginning to form. "So we need to face our fears and insecurities to free the doll and ourselves." "Exactly." I replied, hope shining in my heart. But to do this, we need to unite as a family. We need to show that love is stronger than fear. As the children nodded, a new determination took hold of us. It was time to act. We knew the battle wouldn't be easy, but we were ready to confront Lila and everything she represented. With the diary in hand and my heart racing, I looked into the eyes of Mark and the children. We're going to face this together. We will show Lila that we are stronger than she thinks. And so, with renewed courage, we began to prepare for what was to come. The ritual reached its peak, and amid the intense light enveloping me, I felt my heart pound as if it wanted to escape from my chest. The walls of the room seemed to vibrate with the energy emanating from Lila, while the air was thick with palpable tension, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I glanced at Mark and the children, their faces reflecting fear and confusion. What started as a simple act of protection was now transforming into a battle for our own sanity. Sarah, don't do this. Mark's voice sounded like a distant echo, mixed with Lila's threatening whispers. He was fighting against the influence of the doll, his eyes a blend of despair and determination. You don't know what you're doing. I have to do this, Mark. I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear growing inside me. We need to break free from her. Lila is not our friend. She's tearing our family apart. The light around us seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart, and visions of my grandmother began to form before me. She was so clear, so present. The love I felt for her flooded my being, warming the darkness that tried to envelop me. Lila is a spirit that feeds on negative emotions, Sarah, my grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. She preys on fear and doubt. I know, I murmured, feeling the light within me growing. But I can't let her take my family. I can't. The children, still under Lila's influence, were in a state of agitation. Mom, no. Lila is our friend. Emily shouted, her eyes filled with tears and confusion. You can't do this. She's not your friend, Emily. She's manipulating you. I shouted back, the pain in my voice almost unbearable. You don't understand. We need to fight this together. But Lila's influence was strong, and Jake began to whisper something to Emily, a murmur that sounded like a chant, as if they were making a pact with the doll. Lila said we should stick together, Mom. Forever, he declared, his voice low and dark. Terror spread through me like a biting cold. No. Lila is lying to you. I tried to scream, but the words seemed to get lost in the spiral of energy surrounding us. The ritual was at its apex, and I needed to find the strength to continue. Lila, I challenge you. I declared with all the strength I could muster. You cannot divide us. We are a family, and love is stronger than you. The room shook with my declaration, and Lila's presence began to manifest physically. She appeared before us, a distorted and threatening shadow, her eyes glowing with a hatred that seemed to consume everything around her. You think you can challenge me, Sarah? Her voice was a chilling whisper that sliced through the air. I am more powerful than you can imagine. I felt my body tremble, but the memory of the love for my family gave me courage. No, Lila. You are not more powerful than the love we have for each other. I shouted, and as I said this, I saw the faces of Mark, Emily, and Jake. They looked haunted, but something began to change. A spark of determination started to ignite in their eyes. Sarah. Mark began, but his voice was interrupted by a shrill scream from Lila, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of our surroundings. Silence, the doll screamed, her form distorting even further. You cannot escape me. I am part of you now. It was a moment of clarity. I looked at Mark, at my children. Lila is not part of us. She is an intruder. This revelation struck me like lightning. The love we have is what keeps her away. Let's unite and fight. Mark, struggling against the possession, looked at me with a mix of fear and hope. "You're right, Sarah. We need to fight together." Emily and Jake, now aware of the gravity of the situation, joined us. "We don't want Lila to control us," Emily yelled, her voice firm. "Let's show her we are stronger." Jake added, the determination in his gaze giving me even more strength. The energy in the room began to shift. We felt a wave of warmth spreading between us, as if the light emanating from our hearts was coming together to confront the darkness. "Lila, you have no power over us. We are a family, and love is our strength," I declared, and with each word, the light grew. The walls of the room began to glow, reflecting the unity we were forming. Lila, realizing she was losing control, screamed in rage. "You cannot stop me. I am eternal. But you do not belong to us," Mark shouted, his voice resonating with strength. "We are not afraid of you." The light finally exploded in a wave of energy, enveloping Lila in an intense glow. The room trembled, and a feeling of liberation began to spread. "Now, we will banish you from our lives," I declared, and together, we began to recite words of love and protection that I remembered from what my grandmother had taught me. The shadows around Lila began to dissipate, and her distorted form writhed in agony. "No. This is not possible," she screamed, but her voice was becoming weaker, more distant. "Yes, it is possible. We choose love," we responded in unison, and the light surrounding us intensified even more. Feeling the strength of our family's unity, I realized that the true power was within us, not in Lila. The love we shared was a shield against the darkness. "You will not divide us. Never," I declared, and with one last combined shout, the light exploded in a spectacle of colors, enveloping Lila and dissipating the darkness she brought. With a final scream of despair, Lila was consumed by the light, and in an instant, everything fell silent. The heavy atmosphere that surrounded us dissipated, and the weight on our hearts began to lift. I looked around, meeting the eyes of Mark, Emily, and Jake. There was relief, but also a sense of loss. "We did it," Mark whispered, the emotion in his voice almost making me cry. "We managed to unite against her." Emily and Jake hugged me, and the feeling of love and protection surrounded us like a blanket. "We are a family," I declared, feeling the warmth of our bonds. But even amid this victory, there was an echo of the battle we had faced. Lila's influence had left marks on us. I knew we would have to deal with the consequences, but for now, we were together, and that was what mattered. The room was enveloped in an almost palpable silence after the ritual. The heavy air of tension slowly dissipated, but the relief we had hoped for did not come. Instead, a strange calm settled over the environment, as if the house was waiting for something more. I looked at Mark, his face still pale, his eyes reflecting a mix of relief and confusion. Emily and Jake were silent, staring at their feet, as if trying to comprehend the gravity of what we had just been through. Then something caught my attention. The doll Lila, which until that moment had seemed just an inanimate object, was there, inert on the shelf, but something about her presence felt different. A subtle glow emanated from her, almost as if she were waiting for me to approach. My heart began to race. I remembered the necklace my grandmother always wore, a small amulet that, according to her, was a form of protection. I never thought a simple necklace could hold any special significance, but now, after everything we had lived through, I couldn't ignore the possibility. "Sarah, what are you thinking?" Mark interrupted my thoughts, looking at me with a worried expression. I don't know. I feel like something is missing." "As if we're not done yet," I replied hesitantly. "I need to look inside the doll again." ####. Mark shook his head, visibly exhausted. "No, Sarah. We've faced this before. Let's step back and leave it behind." But I couldn't. The attraction to the doll was strong, almost hypnotic. I slowly walked over to the shelf and picked up Lila in my hands. The wood was cold, and for a moment, a shiver ran down my spine. I just need to see what's inside her, I murmured as I examined her closely. As I looked into the bottom of the doll, I noticed a small compartment I had never seen before. With some effort, I managed to open the compartment, and inside was an old necklace. I recognized it instantly. It was my grandmother's necklace. "Mark, look at this!" I exclaimed, holding the necklace above the doll. "Where did you get that?" he asked, confusion deepening on his face. It was inside the doll. "It's Grandma's necklace." As I held the necklace, a wave of warmth washed over me, as if an invisible connection had been activated. She always said it was a protection amulet. But now, maybe it's more than that. Jake and Emily, who had been quiet until then, approached. "What did you find, Mommy?" Jake asked, his curious gaze fixed on the necklace. "It's a special necklace from Grandma. She always said it protects us," I replied, trying to convey some calm. But inside me, a storm of emotions was brewing. "It could be dangerous, Sarah," Mark said, concerned. "We're just starting to recover." "Yes, but maybe it can help us truly put this behind us." "Lila, the doll might have been the key to understanding what happened," I insisted, looking into my children's eyes. "Grandma left this for us. We need to understand." As I put the necklace around my neck, a bright light enveloped the room, and I was pulled into a vision. The environment around me began to change, and suddenly I was in a place that looked like a tunnel of light. A familiar figure appeared before me. It was my grandmother, her radiant smile illuminating the space. "Sarah, my dear," she said, her voice soft and filled with love. "You finally found what you needed." "Grandma. What's happening? What was Lila? Why did you leave this doll for us?" I asked, my eyes brimming with tears. The warmth of her presence wrapped around me like a hug. "She is not what you think, my granddaughter. Lila is a part of our story, a connection to our family," my grandmother explained, her serene expression contrasting with the chaos we had experienced. "When I created her, it was to protect the family, but her power goes beyond what you can imagine." "Protect? But she almost destroyed our family." Mark was possessed, and the kids were under her influence. I protested, confused and distressed. "Yes, but it was also a test. The love and unity of the family are the true forces that can face the darkness. You and Mark need to understand that difficulties are opportunities for growth. Lila was here for you to come together, to face your fears and insecurities," my grandmother said, her voice now firmer. "It was a struggle, but love is always the answer. But how can we overcome this? What should we do now?" I was desperate, the vision of my grandmother starting to fade. "Use the love you have for your family as your strength. Lila is not a villain, she is a portal, a reflection of what you need to face together. The protection you feel is real, but it's the love that makes it powerful," my grandmother replied, her words echoing in my mind. "I understand. We need to unite, no matter what happens. We need to show Lila that we are stronger together," I exclaimed, feeling a renewed determination growing inside me. "Exactly, my dear. The true power lies within you," my grandmother smiled before the light began to intensify, and I felt myself being pulled back to the room. When I returned to reality, the atmosphere was charged with energy. Mark and the kids were silent, their gazes fixed on me. "What happened?" he asked, and I realized I had tears in my eyes. "She was a form of protection, Mark. Lila was not the villain. She brought us here to face our fears and unite. We need to remember what we are, a family," I declared, emotion overflowing in my voice. "But what if she comes back? What if there's still something to fear?" Mark questioned, worry still on his face. "We don't need to fear anymore. Lila was a reflection of our insecurities and conflicts. Now that we know this, we have the strength of love to face her, I said, looking at the kids. Are you ready to unite and face this together? Emily and Jake looked at each other before nodding, and the atmosphere in the room began to change. The shadows surrounding us seemed to dissipate. Let's do this together, Mommy. Jake said, his face lighting up with determination. Yes, we are a family. Emily added, holding Jake's hand. Mark looked at me, and I could see the fear dissipating from his face. Then let's do this. Let's face whatever comes next, together. With that, we gathered in a circle, hands intertwined. My grandmother's necklace glimmered around my neck, and Lila's presence seemed to grow more distant. We were no longer alone, and the strength of love and unity surrounded us. Lila, if you are listening, know that we are together. We are not afraid of you. We are ready to face whatever you represent, I declared, my voice echoing through the room. The air began to vibrate, as if something was about to manifest. The light from the necklace grew, and I felt a wave of warmth enveloping us all. We could sense Lila trying to manifest, but now we were ready. We were united, and that was all we needed. And above all, we know that, no matter what happens, we are a family, I shouted, the strength of my words resonating through the house. And in that moment, Lila's presence began to dissipate, not as a villain, but as a part of our story, a testament to the love that united us. The past, present, and future intertwined, revealing the true strength of our family. That day, we found not only liberation from a negative influence but also the redemption and unity that should have always existed. The doll Lila, now distant, would become a symbol of the love that brought us together, a reminder that even in the shadows, love shines brighter.